Something that may or may not surprise you is I'm an avid listener of classical music. There's a reason these pieces of music have survived over the centuries and will continue to be wonderful compositions that reflect the brilliance of these composers. To celebrate their work, I'm going to count down my favorite classical music pieces, and in the interest of fairness, no composer occupies more than one spot. I feel I've put together a good variety of pieces here, so let's begin. As the name of the piece suggests, this music is a reflection of the nighttime, and Chopin really manages to capture that moment when everything is dark, the streets are quiet, and the crickets are chirping. These are slow burn piano pieces, but each note grabs our attention. The Nocturnes total almost 2 hours, and yet they're captivating the entire time. The Nocturnes transition well from soft notes to louder keys. They're just really relaxing pieces, and one of many beautiful compositions written by Chopin. This string piece is a fast-paced delight that does the job of whisking us back to 18th century Venice. It makes such perfect use of the mandolin and its unique sound with the appropriate orchestral backing when the occasion calls for it. When the piece slows down about a quarter of the way through the composition, there's an optimistic tone that befits the instrument, and then it turns around and goes back to plucking the strings as quickly as possible. The quirky charm in the music just adds to the overall enjoyment of it. For a lot of people, this music conjures up the image of spinning ballerinas. For others, they think of space stations out in the vastness of the cosmos. I think that's a key to the timelessness and universality of this piece. There's a playfulness to the Blue Danube that is incredibly enchanting, as it never becomes a dour and depressing composition, but rather one that celebrates optimism and endless opportunities. It's cheery and catchy and peppy, and who doesn't love that kind of music? The various instruments of the orchestra combine for a delightful melody, and Strauss takes full advantage of every section. Outside of the obvious connection to 2001: A Space Odyssey, the other image Blue Danube tends to conjure up for me are ducks in a pond. It's just easy to imagine them waddling and splashing around while a nearby band is playing this piece. You may notice a theme of my picks, as they tend to be rather fast-paced compositions, but I guess I find something immediately appealing about classical pieces where the music is running through the orchestra at top speed. The Thieving Magpie is one such composition, with a story involving a war deserter and the chase for missing cutlery. So you can imagine why the music gets so chaotic and frantic. Rossini makes particularly good use of strings and drums throughout the piece, and the energy goes up as the characters within the story get more and more desperate. Yet there's a comedic air to the Thieving Magpie that makes it a delightful and listenable piece, whether you know the story, which to be honest I only learned this week, or not. One of those composers I knew would have an instant spot on the list was Beethoven. He has composed many fantastic pieces, including his famous symphonies, but I have to pick the Fifth Symphony as my favorite. Beethoven was known for his rather loud and angry compositions, and this was no exception, with booming horns and oboes, and it never lets up. It's constantly moving and shaking. There have been many different interpretations over the years, though I envision the Fifth Symphony as people lost at sea with a storm thrashing at their boat. There are its quieter moments, and they are certainly just as effective in their mood as the more bombastic parts of the piece. These are when the strings are given the opportunity to shine, and they are magnificent. It's an over 30-minute piece of music that is certainly a wondrous listen. This is a composition that always makes me think of Halloween, as the music immediately brings to mind ghosts coming out at night. There's an eerie quality to this piece, and Saint-Saëns makes particularly good use of the violins, whether they're screeching or performing a beautiful melody. Yet despite the macabre theme of the music, there's a high spirit and joyful quality to it, as ghosts do want to enjoy their haunting. The images it conjures up really capture why we gravitate towards scary beings like ghosts, witches, and monsters, especially around October. It's little surprise that Danse Macabre has entered the popular culture a number of centuries since it was first performed, from television series to a famous haunted house in the world-renowned Dutch theme park Efteling. This is actually a rather short piece of music, written for the Norwegian play Peter Gynt, but it's such a wonderful little tune, I had to include it on this list. The story within the play involved Peter coming across a hole where trolls and goblins live, and it's definitely fitting music for such an occasion. The way Grieg builds and builds the music adds to the excitement as we await something sinister happening. There's an adventurous quality to the music, and it can be applied to many a situation, not just the fantasy setting of the original play. In The Hall of the Mountain King can be interpreted as sneaky, curious, thrilling, and mischievous, maybe all at once, especially as more and more instruments are added in. And it's immediately catchy, as ever since I first heard it as a child, it has not once left my head. Initially, I'd intended to only include pieces performed before the 20th century. However, upon finding out that would make Peter and the Wolf, written in 1936, ineligible for this list, I decided to make an exception. This is maybe the best example of a classical music piece that pairs specific instruments to characters in a story. From the opening, where Peter makes his introduction via string instruments, it becomes easy to visualize. Throw in the duck with the oboe, the cat with the clarinet, the bird with the flute, and the other characters, and this becomes a delightful teaching tool of the entire orchestra. That the story is a fun and well-crafted one makes Peter and the Wolf even more enjoyable. Of course, there have been various iterations with some notable narrators and even some superb animated adaptations, but I tend to find myself going back to the classic instrumentals just to admire the beautiful notes crafted by Prokofiev. When I was mounting this list, I tried to think of one specific musical composition by Mozart to include, but I could not think of just one. There's a reason he's so often named the best classical composer in history. The many symphonies, concertos, and string quartets he composed were spectacular, the most beautiful melodies imaginable. Whenever I listen to his music, it always amazes me how this man could craft as many wondrous pieces, beginning in his childhood and continuing on until his far too young death. His music could be light and whimsical, dark and brooding, romantic and passionate. Upon putting this video on my schedule, Mozart was the first composer I knew I had to include. He really was that brilliant, and his music will forever be played as long as concert halls remain in existence. Sorry, Salieri. And my favorite classical music piece is... I frequently mentioned my affinity towards fast-paced compositions on this list, and this is definitely the ultimate one. It does start off slowly, as Liszt builds up our interest. It's dramatic and almost foreboding at first, but then it eventually slips into a lighter mood about 6 minutes in. The beat gets faster and crazier, and it never lets go. There's a joy in execution in that section of the Rhapsody, as the instruments seem to compete for who can play the quickest. The whole piece just spins more and more out of control as we attempt to keep up. It just makes one admire the piece even more, as this cannot be an easy composition to play, whether it's a lone piano player or a full orchestra. And okay, I admit, part of my affection for the Hungarian Rhapsody is how it's been used in many cartoons over the years. From Mickey Mouse to Tom and Jerry to Bugs Bunny to Animaniacs, if you've watched your fair share of animation, you've heard this tune match perfectly some of our favorite cartoon characters. But who can blame writers and animators for wanting to use Franz Liszt's wild and, dare I say, loony piece? However, even by itself, I frequently enjoy listening to it. So that was my list. Let me know what your favorite classical music pieces are, and I'll see you next time.